Mr. and Mrs. Woodman were not lucky for a very long time. They had no children. Helen Woodman was treated everywhere, traveled to all the holy places, and even bought a trip to Jerusalem. Her husband Michael followed his wife everywhere, like a faithful knight. But there were no results. The Woodmans came to terms with their situation and decided to take a child from the orphanage, or better yet, the girls. They were packing a travel bag to go to the neighboring region, where the orphanage was located, to get acquainted with the little ones. Babies at the age of 3 lived there. Helen was packing simple sandwiches with homemade meatballs when suddenly their appetizing smell became terribly unpleasant to her. The woman rushed to the bathroom, clasping her hands over her mouth. She felt nauseous. The trip had to be cancelled. Instead, the couple went to the clinic, where it turned out that Helen Woodman is 16 weeks pregnant. Michael almost lost his mind with joy. The gynecologist in charge of receiving patients threatened to call the guards if the man did not calm down and did not stop tossing up stacks of educational booklets, neatly arranged on coffee tables, like fall leaves in the garden. From that day on, the spouses switched to wait and see mode. Michael, rejecting all supermarket foods, ran like crazy through farmers' market, buying cottage cheese and vegetables without nitrates and pesticides. Helen followed her diet and regimen in disciplined manner, as befits a woman with a college degree in education and 20 years of experience working in an educational institution. A few weeks later, fate gave the Woodmans another surprise. An ultrasound scan revealed twins. Pregnancy was hard for Helen. Her age was taking its toll. After all, she was no longer a girl. Most of the time, she had to stay in the hospital, being preserved. But the woman's suffering were not in vain. At the due date, two wonderful girls were born. The Woodman family began a difficult, full of worries and troubles, wonderful and happy life. Their daughters were named after their grandmothers, Charlotte and Mary. The girls grew up calm and healthy, pleasing their parents and not causing them any serious problems. The parents were proud to note that their twins were far ahead of their peers in development, and were clever and obedient. They looked like two peas in a pod, yet they were different in character. Charlotte was a sportswoman and a very sociable child. Mary adored books and nature and loved solitude. Both sisters loved each other dearly. It was evident how strong was the spiritual bond between them. 18 years flew by, unnoticed, and the girls grew up and became real beauties. Charlotte was always wooed by young guys, and there was no shortage of admirers. She took them for a spin as she wished. The girl led a full life, received a master's degree in swimming, and traveled all over the country, winning prizes. At one of her competitions, Charlotte met Andrew, a lively and cheerful guy, and started to correspond actively. And then they decided to get married and told their parents about it. Mary was a homebody and led an almost secretive life. She did not make any friends. Communicating with her parents and sister was enough. She rarely left the city. She did not like to travel. Her hobby was cooking. The girl created masterpieces of taste from simple products, and often her family, including Charlotte, grumbled. The smells in the apartment are unbelievable again. How can I keep my figure with these yummies? And Mary also loved animals, and was always dragging home a kitten with a broken leg, a starling with a broken wing, or a mangled beast. It seems not a home, but a veterinary station. She was always rescuing, curing, and nursing someone. As a permanent resident, they had a huge Central Asian Shepherd dog, or Alibi, named Rambo, Mary's and the family's favorite. His father gave the puppy to his daughter for her birthday 3 years ago. The fluffy white lump grew into a huge dog and became Mary's best friend and protector. Although Alibis are serious and formidable dogs, Rambo absolutely did not justify either his purpose or his strict name. She rushed at everyone with only one goal: to kiss them to death. Charlotte, when Rambo tried to reach her face with his tongue, wrinkled squeamishly. "Oh, Rambo, leave me alone. What kind of dog are you? Get your paws off." "Mary, call your slob. I've got hair all over my blouse." The alibi was not offended. He just as eagerly switched to Andrew, the groom. He laughed, waving the annoying dog off. Alright. Not up to you, silly." Silly won, weighing 130 pounds, ran to his mistress, cheerfully wagging his bushy tail. He loved guests, but today, indeed, There was no time for games. Charlotte and Andrew applied for the registry office. There were so many problems and nuances to discuss with their parents. The groom's parents were also waiting for the call on Skype. A serious video conference was scheduled. After all, a wedding in the life of the family, involving almost all relatives. Meanwhile, summer had arrived. The wedding day was just around the corner. Andrew took his bride in his arms, gave her flowers, and bought her funny trinkets. Her parents and sister were worried. Charlotte had spent the last days of her life in the family. After the wedding, the groom would take her beloved to another town, to a new apartment, bought as a present by her in laws. The day before, the young couple gathered at the restaurant to discuss once again the menu and the wedding decorations for the hall. Naturally, they also invited Mary, a connoisseur cook, to join them. It was impossible to do without her in such a delicate matter as a festive table. The trio got into the car, and Andrew started the engine. Then something unbelievable happened to Rambo. He started throwing himself under the wheels of the car, chewing on the tires, barking, and howling. Michael jumped out of the house to put a collar on the distraught dog and take him home. Charlotte told her sister, "You have spoiled your favorite boy. He won't let you go anywhere alone." Mary was silent and agitated. Something was wrong here, but she didn't dare cancel an important trip because of Rambo's whims. She didn't want to offend her sister. She looked at the alibi through the back window and waved cheerfully. The car moved off and drove away. Rambo howled long, and a tear rolled down his face. Michael got goosebumps on his back. He had never seen a dog cry before. Andrew drove skillfully and confidently. His bride was not at all afraid when the speedometer showed an increase in speed up to 60 miles. And this time, Andrew's passengers were chatting and joking with each other, as if nothing had happened. The driver slowed down a little. There was a dangerous turn ahead. It was summer, the road was dry. Why should he drive like an old turtle? The car dashingly entered the abrupt curve of the road, and then a lumber truck flew into the oncoming lane. The trailer with a heavy load wobbled from side to side, and the driver tried to straighten his truck, but did not have time. The lugging truck crushed Andrew's silver sedan under it. A short time later, rescuers, police, and an ambulance arrived at the scene of the tragedy. Two bodies were lying on the side of the road, both in sacks. Andrew and Charlotte died instantly. The rescuers had to cut metal with a burning bar to get out of the mangled car what the young and beautiful people had become. The ambulance, howling its siren, sped toward town. In the cabin, the doctors were fighting over the miraculous survivor, Mary, but she never regained consciousness. The driver of the lumber truck, an elderly man who had not received a single scratch, was sitting by the roadside with his hand around his gray head, rocking from side to side. "What have I done? Old stump. I've killed." He had been very tired lately, working without days off. He fell asleep at the wheel and caused the tragedy. Now a funeral was, instead of a wedding. What could be scarier? The parents had aged 10 years. They silently stood at the graves like stone statues. They had no strength to cry. But when the first clod of earth fell on Charlotte's coffin, the mother was barely held back. She almost threw herself into the grave. Andrew's father was shaken with small shivers. He was alone at the funeral. The boy's mother had suffered a stroke. Michael and Helen were left with only one daughter, but this did not add to their joy. Mary lay in a deep coma and did not react to anything. Instead of a beautiful and intelligent girl, there was a vegetable in the intensive care unit, hooked up to a machine for life support. It was painful to look at her parents, and all her acquaintances, relatives, and friends were afraid to even talk to them, as if their grief was contagious and could spill over into those around them. The doctors did their best, but their hopes for Mary's return from the other side of reality were fading before their eyes. And only one of them, a young doctor, Daniel Miller, with unviable persistence defended the life of the patient. Yes, Dr. Miller was a real doctor, determined, talented, and honest. He clung to every opportunity that gave the girl a chance. The colleagues shook their heads in bewilderment, not understanding why Daniel is fighting so desperately. Well, had he fallen in love with the Sleeping Beauty after all? And no one knew, or would have believed, that Dr. Miller had really fallen in love with Mary when he first saw her. Fragile, delicate, looking like an outlandish butterfly with broken wings. In the end, Daniel made up his mind and convened a council. The renowned doctors argued fiercely and insisted that the young doctor was committing murder. It was unacceptable. Others argued that it was a chance. The colleagues did not notice a dry, elderly woman who quietly entered the room. Everyone fell silent. Helen Woodman, bewildered, stood quietly and looked at the doctors with eyes full of despair. Daniel approached the woman. Mrs. Woodman, please listen to me and don't interrupt. He explained to the woman that the council had accepted his proposal to inject a new drug that had proven itself in research. An urgent operation was needed, urgent and very expensive, but Mary needed it. Daniel's faith in a miracle was so strong that the woman did not hesitate long over such a question, and her husband sold the car along with the garage, valuables, and equipment to raise the necessary amount. It's better than watching our little girl slowly fade away. Michael could hardly keep from crying. Isn't it true, Rambo? He stroked the emaciated, sickly dog on the head. Rambo sighed heavily. He ate nothing but occasional drink of water. No one knew how long this dog had left to live. Rambo even stopped howling. He lay with his head on his paw and was silent, tearing the heart out of his tormented parents. The operation wasn't successful and yielded no positive results. Dr. Miller irritably ripped his gloves off his hands and went into the smoking room. He did not want anyone to see the big, young, and strong man crying his eyes out. All for nothing. All in vain. Michael and Helen were destroyed. Their hope for the best had collapsed. They had to say goodbye to their daughter. There was no more money for the life support machine. They wandered down the hospital corridor, supporting each other like two decrepit old men. Leaving the house, Michael left the door unlocked. Helen, darling, don't swear. I'm not likely to come back here after Mary. The man swayed. And you too, I know. At least then the dog can go outside. It's bad enough to die alone, isn't it? Dr. Miller did not give up. He decided to sell everything he had, take a loan, and even rob a Swiss bank, but not to turn off Mary's machine. It remained to wait for his parents and tell them everything. Mary must live, and that's all. Daniel received a call that the parents of the patient had arrived. The doctor rushed to the room. Helen kissed Mary goodbye. Michael stood and cried with grief. Soon Dr. Miller would appear at the door, and everything would be over. Another thread of life would be cut, pulling the thin strings of her father and mother. We should have taken Rambo to say goodbye, said Michael. It's not fair somehow. Who would let him in here? Replied Helen mechanically. They would. You hear a dog barking in the hospital? They let him in to see someone. Michael's tone was even. Helen looked at her husband anxiously. Had he gone mad? A dog's barking? What a nonsense. But the dog's barking was not a hallucination. It was coming closer and stronger. And then the door of the room burst open, and a huge white dog flew into the room. He ran up to the girl's bed and gave such a shrill shriek of joy that the dazed parents shuddered at the same time. It was Rambo. He was rushing about the bed, whimpering, licking Mary's face, and furiously wagging his tail as if it were a little propeller. Helen and Michael did not move, stunned by what was happening in front of them. And a miracle happened. The sensors came to life, signaling that the patient had come out of her coma. The girl's eyelashes fluttered, and she opened her eyes, and saw the face of an alibi. Rambo, Mary whispered. I heard you barking. Hi. Dr. Miller, who entered the room at the moment, was stunned. The hospital staff, nurses, and guards, who rushed in pursuit of the alibi, one after another, crushed into Daniel's broad back at full speed. Mary was recovering quickly, and Rambo was gaining weight at the same rate, eating for three. Helen was exhausted from making porridge for the dog, with huge pots. Michael was finally able to sleep without dreams and tears. Dr. Miller cared for the patient like an attendant physician and a respectful lover. He gave the girl flowers and tried to pamper her with delicacies that he cooked himself. Mary, after tasting a spoonful of salad, appreciated the doctor's culinary talent. Dr. Miller, haven't you ever dreamed of launching a restaurant? No. Mary smiled silly. And you would try it, and you would hire me for a job. I'm as good a cook as you are, you know. She ate another spoonful of salad, and maybe even better. Dr. Miller did not launch a restaurant, but he did a more important deed in his life. He offered his hand and a heart to Mary. The girl happily agreed. The young people were kissing, and Rambo jumped around and openly interfered with the lovers, trying to get to their faces with his drooling kisses.